Hey everyone, so part of our Snowflake education, I figured we would go over some data loading. So we're gonna go over three very bare minimum, nothing too crazy, no transformations of data, ways to load our data. So we're going to go over Alteryx using the ODBC connector through the GUI and also via an external stage being Azure for us. So just go over our data really quickly. I just pulled some data from the NOAA fisheries. It's just recreational fishing expenditures. Basically goes over different costs of the fishing equipment people are buying and sort of how they're fishing. So whether it's being with a guide or on their own. I love fishing, so I thought it'd be really interesting to look at, and I'm potentially gonna make something via reporting off of it. So let's go into our loading. So we can go to help, download, and then we can go and choose our ODBC driver. So you're gonna wanna download this and configure it properly. One thing I wanna note is Snowflake has really great documentation around it. And here you can see for Windows or whatever OS you guys have. Just go through those steps. They lay it out really nicely, and then you can configure in Alteryx. So here you can see I just have the CSV file on. For Angler expenditure data for 2011, I couldn't find anything more recent, so 2011 will do. And you would just put an output tool onto the canvas. Go to your data connections, so the down caret, data sources, scroll down to find Snowflake, and we're just going to choose ODBC for this interaction. There is bulk as well, which tends to be a little bit quicker, but let's do ODBC. And here you specify your username, which for me, I'm using a service account, so it's AYX loader, and your password. This is where you're gonna actually define your table name. So let's name this Angler Data 2011, and then underscore AYX for Alteryx. Just click OK. And here you can see transaction size. I have show transaction messages clicked on default and all the different configurations you can choose. I'm going to create a new table because I don't have a table currently created, but you could have some different options here as far as how you want to go about those output options. But for us, we're just going to create a new table. So this takes quite a while is what I've noticed with the ODBC connector, but it is really nice because it creates the table for you, which I personally love, and you'll sort of see that when we go through the GUI. But we'll leave this running while we go through the GUI steps. So let's hop back into Snowflake. Done. All right, so I'm at the databases in the breadcrumb trail and clicked on my demo DB and went to tables is how I got to this page here. So what I'm gonna do is I can create a new table. We'll sort of go over two different options here. You can give it a table name, select the schema if you want it to be in a different schema. I'm just gonna work in public because this is sort of like my sandbox almost. And this is where you can actually add in your columns and change the names. So for example, if I had year or equipment cost, and then you can change your data type to different data types that would fit. So for example, this one, maybe I would want to do a double. And I would expect this never to be null, for example. Say at default, nothing costs less than $3. You'd put a default of $3. But I have 52 columns in this data set, so I don't want to do that repetitively. So let's cancel out of this. And we're going to click the next option, which is create like. I actually already have a table in here that I just have the column names. So I'm going to create like, And I'm gonna name this Angler Data GUI. And I'm gonna source it like the public Angler expenses, which is just my column names, like I had said. Even if it had data in it, creating like just creates like a shell of it essentially. So it just shows the same column names. It won't bring over the data. To do that, you'd need to clone it. So let's finish. And now we can see Angler Data GUI. And here you can see 0 rows, and you can also actually see the Alteryx load going. So we have 448 rows already and the size. So that's sort of fun that you can sort of like track that almost. So now that we have our table created, let's load the data. So we're going to use our bids warehouse. And I'm going to select the file. All right, and next. And we're going to do CSV common. And if we wanted to show the SQL, just so if you're learning SQL, it's a nice way to learn. You can see the SQL here. So it's actually putting our file from our local into a user stage. And then from there, we are copying it into our UI. And here it says on error, we're gonna abort the statement. So we'll see if this actually goes. It might actually fail because I think I've got some errors in here. So sort of as I expected, I got an error. So let's run through this again and I can sort of go over what I'm gonna do to mitigate that. So we'll go into load data, warehouse selected. I'll select my file. And you could sort of see it was like from like user input basically. This particular one was from someone talking about how they go fishing a lot, which is great. So we're going to go to load options, but you just had to click next from the file format. And we're going to do continue loading valid data from the file. Just so that we show the SQL so you can see what that looks like. Looks like on error continue. So now let's load our data. There's some other options too that you could select for that. I'm not loading this most logically because I'm literally reading from the same file that I am writing from currently. So it's reading, both the Alteryx and the GUI are reading from the same file. Not the most logical thing to do, but that's why we're gonna keep pausing the video here. So I'm gonna pause it again and let this load. Okay, so jumping back in, the load completed here, you can sort of see how many rows were parsed and how many were actually loaded. So we did lose a few rows here. just because we're walking through this is, again, very high level example, I'm okay with it. So we'll click OK. And we can see here Alteryx is almost at 5,000. So they've got a way to go. So while that's still going, let's do our load from our external. So there's a few different things we can do. We can create a stage, which will reference our external data. I already have 2 created here, but let's just walk through how to create one again. You can connect to whatever external stage you like, or you can just do a Snowflake managed stage, which is considered an internal stage. So we'll do our Azure. And I'm not going to fill out this completely, but this is where you'd give it a name like my stage, for example. You can define what schema you'd like it to be loading to. I'm going to keep it on public. And the URL is where you're going to find on your Azure side. You would just go into basically your blob storage, I believe under the container, and you're going to go to properties and you can find your URL. You replace the HTTP or HTTPS with Azure, and that has your account information and everything necessary to create your stage. And from there you'd click finish. But again, I've already created 2, so not really necessary at this point. Another thing you're going to want to do is create a pipe. So you can go to your pipes and you can create a pipe name. So let's just say like my pipe. And we'll do a public schema. My stage, we'll do our snow stage. File format is going to be my CSV common. And this is where we're going to define our destination. So here we're going to do our Angular expenses. And again, this is the one that I just created like a shell, essentially, just the columns. There's no data actually in it currently. And we can create our pipe. And that name already exists, so let's go back and we'll rename it. My second pipe. Usually you'd want to use more like logical naming conventions than my second pipe, but for this example, we will make do create pipe. And here you can see my second pipe, owned by sysadmin, which is me. So let's again go over, you have your stage, which is referencing our external Azure stage, and our pipe, which is basically the connection that's going to go from our Snowflake environment to our external stage. So let's go to worksheets and we'll do this worksheet, which is copying into our Angular expenses from my Azure URL, which files I'd like, because I've got multiple files in that blob storage. My file format is my CSV common, and same thing that we saw before, there's some errors in these files, so I'm going to just have on error continue. I want it to keep on going. So we can also briefly see I have it running as sysadmin, I have it on our bids warehouse, and our demo DB public schema. So let's give this a run. This shouldn't be reading from the same file, so it should be running quicker than the past 2. So you can see here the information that we get. We get partially loaded, again, because I had some errors, so it's going to take those errors out, and a few different information. So you can see your first error column, and you can sort of see that it's coming back a little bit wonky. That's why it wasn't reading it in properly as I'd expect. But those are a few different ways that you can read in or load your data. So you can see them here. We have Angular expenses, Ultrix, which is still going, unfortunately. Again, I've been finding it's a little bit slower, but it's a really nice way to get your data in there, especially if you're doing some manipulations beforehand. But there's other great products like Matillion that I can speak to that is really great for ETL processing. But he's still chugging away. And then we also have our GUI load. So again, this was just a really brief introduction to different ways to load your data. There's many different ways you can do